through our terrible education system in this country, we have literally brought up kids that really don't understand our country. They don't understand that American exceptionalism and what sets us apart from the rest of the world.
I'm Dr. Duke, and this is my take on the news. We're joined today by Art Thompson, the CEO of the John Birch Society. Art, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
You have a wonderful new book out called China, the Deep State's Trojan Horse in America. And it's a thin volume, but boy, does it pack a punch. And you can get it at shopjbs.org. That's shopjbs.org. And we're going to have a conversation about what's going on in the world and what's going on in America with regard to the Chinese. And I want to start with Houston. I mean, literally in Houston, Texas, you have Trump has basically ordered the Chinese to vacate their embassy. And on the way out, they are burning. Talk about polluting the environment. What's going on in Houston right now?
Well, the government hasn't told us officially, but obviously it's got something to do with national security. And that's been the problem with the Chinese embassies and their consulates and that sort of thing. They are actually espionage centers. And Houston is interesting because it's not only the embassy there, but the port. The Chinese want to control the port of Houston as well. In fact, a lot of Americans don't realize that China has been busy buying into or buying up ports all over the world, including the United States. The American government just stopped them from buying out the Los Angeles port, for instance, but they're still heavy in Long Beach and that kind of thing. But be that as it may, one of the problems with these ports is that they do infiltrate Chinese into our country through these ports. For a while, they were bringing them in the shipping containers, if you can believe that or not. So if they control these ports, then they can control the influx of these illegal Chinese infiltrating into the United States. And Houston would be one of those. And I would imagine that the Houston consulate there probably coordinated a lot of that. And that's one of the reasons why it's been shut down. Now, that's purely speculation, but based on past experience.
And not in my lifetime have I seen a president do this with. I mean, is this, in your experience, is this unprecedented for a president to basically order a foreign government to abandon their embassy?
Well, I've seen it happen before, but it is so very rare, and it's usually in retaliation. In other words, they close ours down, so we close one of theirs down. We very seldom have actually implemented or initiated that process.
And that's what this is. We have here. Right. And the Chinese have already vowed retaliation for what we've done. But how is it possible that we have so many apologists in the news, in the journalism field, in government, but on both sides of the aisle? I mean, to somebody like me who's watching all of this, you know, I'm not a Sino historian. I haven't spent a lot of my life studying that aspect of the world. But when you just look around and see what's going on in Hong Kong and the threats to Taiwan, the belligerent rhetoric that comes out of China about who owns the South China Sea, who's allowed to sail that way, the way they've reacted to trade policies that try to level the playing field between us and the Chinese state. Why are there so many in America who just have no idea and want to look upon China as if they are benevolent, if not a model we should follow, like with the virus?
Well, that's a multi-layered answer. And part of it is that the Chinese actually are the source of a lot of the philosophy of these street organizations you see in activity today. But in addition to that, they are actually paying journalists in the media. Recently, for instance, 4 members of CNN went from CNN over to the Chinese news agency. And they probably were in the pay of the Chinese while they were at CNN. In fact, there was an article, a major article, I believe it was in the London Times, that exposed the fact that China had a program for wrapping up the world's journalists into telling the story of China in the way China wanted it reported. So a lot of this information is not getting out in the media because of that kind of influence. And so you can't blame the average citizens for not knowing what's going on or getting a slant that's really quite erroneous.
What, in your estimation, having written this book, what do you think it's going to mean for the global circumstance if Joe Biden and his really kind of unctuous ties to China, he becomes the president? What do you think would happen under a Biden regime, especially if he had the House and the Congress?
Well, first of all, Biden would become very rich.
Richer than he is.
Richer than he is, because the history of the Biden family is a history of taking money, just like Hillary and others, the Clintons. But under a Biden administration, I would assume that Congress would probably be a problem as well. Maybe the Senate would be lost. If we lost the Senate and the House and the presidency, and we don't know what in the world's going on in the heads of the people in the Supreme Court, I don't think after 4 or 8 years we would recognize our country. I think the Constitution would be a piece of paper rather than a living document that runs, that rules over our government.
Do the people at the highest level, the deep state swamp creatures who are undermining the president at every chance they can, do they actually want Chinese communism here, or do they imagine, in your estimation, do they imagine that when we have a globalist system, we'll be even moving beyond communism? What is it that they really want in this country with regards to China?
Well, there are 3 types of people involved in this. Number one is the idealist that thinks a one world government's going to bring peace. Secondly, are those that want a one world government that they can run. A number of businessmen and things like that. Keep in mind that the men that are running these major corporations are not entrepreneurs. They are Yale and Harvard trained apparatchiks that they know how to run a company, but philosophically they are globalists. And then third are those that really want to bring about a communist world government run by the communist parties united. Now, I used to infiltrate Marxist organizations as a very young man. And I can tell you that a lot of the Democrats that I knew then were just as bad as they are today, but they didn't let anybody know about it. It was more difficult in those days because the average American citizen was better informed. They were an anti-communist, so on and so forth. That's changed today. Through our terrible education system in this country, we have literally brought up kids that really don't understand our country. They don't understand that American exceptionalism and what sets us apart from the rest of the world. And I even get into that in some of the one chapter in the book about the Confucius Institutes. They're at over 500 high schools in the United States and over 80 universities. They used to have close to 100, but some universities have pulled out of it now because they realize that these things are really centers for agitation and recruiting the students into what the Chinese want them to be doing in the streets in this country. So it's a number of different things that are involved, but overall it involves a lot of Chinese money, bribing a lot of people in this country to do what they do. And you know where they get that money? When you go into Walmart. When you buy made in China.
Right, of course.
And then they take that money to subvert us, not only in the United States, but in Latin America, in Africa. Do you know today that the Chinese bank today is the world's largest lender to developing countries around the world, and have supplanted the United States influence in many, many areas as a result of it?
This is the Belt. What was the program? The Belt?
Well, that Belt Highway, they've renamed it, and I can't remember either one of them, but it goes all the way into Europe. And along the way, they're helping these countries. Pakistan, for instance, is virtually the same as China relative to the two governments. In fact, the ruler of Pakistan a few years ago said that we are one country and two nations. And so that kind of help into a country like Pakistan and others all along that route have forced those governments to acquiesce to the Chinese.
Tough question. We see where this is moving, and it doesn't look good. Trump's fighting, but he seems to obviously be fighting this alone, right? That gets very little support for what he's doing with China. What does China have any vulnerabilities in your mind now that could be exploited? What would be the way or aspects of the Chinese civilization and situation now that can be exploited for freedom as opposed to tyranny?
Well, there's a number of things. Number one is stop buying Chinese goods. Buy American. If they cost a little more, okay. Or you can go without them if we don't make them. But anyway, that's one way. Don't give money to China. But secondly, understand that you can't make a deal with China and have them live up to it. Within China, though, there are a lot of people that want freedom. I mean, they wouldn't be locking up millions of people, literally millions of people, into concentration camps like the Nazis and the Russians did if they didn't have problems with their own people.
Right.
So within China, there's this underlying fervor, if you will, that they don't like what's going on. They may not be able to identify what the solution is or that sort of thing, but they know they're in bondage. Look at what happened in Hong Kong. Now, that was more free
people who
area.
had been free, yeah.
Yeah. But I never honestly believed that the Hong Kong people would be able to maintain their freedom. They're too surrounded, plus the fact the other countries around the world did nothing. I mean, they may have paid lip service a little bit, but when it came to actually telling the Chinese communists, don't. Leave Hong Kong alone. They didn't do it.
They didn't back it up.
No,
Art Thompson, and I really want you to get this book because all the unanswered questions here today are all in this book. This is China, the Deep State's Trojan Horse in America. Shop jbs.org to get your copy. Thanks for joining us today.